So now looking at our final session, we will look ahead a little bit. What's coming next? How can we work together on spectrum now that we have identified current and future environment that aviation is facing in utilizing spectrum for safety critical functions? This session will explore how we can work together to provide the best way forward. Our moderator is Eric Bouchard, who will discuss with experts from regulators, international organizations, and the industry, the vision for future spectrum planning. Eric is a project manager in Dassault Aviation here in Paris and has been the chair of the Zurich High Technical Advisory Committee for many years now. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm very pleased to meet with all the guys of this session. So this session, working together spectrum, what's next? So we all know that working together now, after all what has been discussed, is not an option. So the main questions around this is how to make all the stakeholders around spectrum, users, regulators, and maybe others, to be able to find durable and balanced solutions. We need to address the very large scope of needs, scopes of issues, interests, what are the core values, and so on. So that's a large topic. And the question is, after in the end, what can be the relevant format in which everybody can tell what their view of the future is and how it may work. So it's a very large topic, framing the future. And so I leave the floor to our panelists. Thanks again for them to join. And I'll leave the floor first to Hette from EASA.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning to everyone. Good afternoon for those who are in Europe. So the theme of this session is working together. If we could move to the next slide, please. I'm going to repeat a few things I said yesterday. So for those who joined the session that I was in yesterday, you may see some overlap here, but we all know and we've learned in the past 2 days that spectrum is in high demand and therefore it's a most valuable asset. We also learned that demand will only increase. And I do believe that, as an aviation industry, and I consider regulators as part of that industry, for all intents and purposes, we may not always appreciate the value of that spectrum that we are using. And I think it's important for us to start to realize that just that little, piece of radio altimeter spectrum that we're using is already worth billions. Now, that's not to say that aviation will have to pay for it. Far from that. But I think it does play a role in the sense that we need to manage our spectrum better than we do today. Aviation needs to become a good neighbor. And you may have heard Gary Birch in one of the earlier sessions today refer to ITU Radio Regulation 4.1, which in a nutshell requires us to apply the latest technology. The question that we could ask is, have we done that consistently? And can we do better there? I think in terms of being a good neighbor, we also need to be ready, or at least consider moving from the old dogmatic approach that we've had of protecting to sharing. We're never going to compromise on safety. That's absolutely clear. But the question is, can we use new technologies to enable safe coexistence of aviation and other spectrum use, either in neighboring bands or even in the same band? And I could ask a few other questions as well. Do we always need protection? Can we achieve the same thing by using redundancy, for example? And I also note that quite often we're using a lot of protected spectrum for aspects that may not always be considered as safety critical. So there again, I think we need to try to do better and have the discussions. Next slide, please. So I believe that spectrum needs to become part of our DNA. We currently discuss spectrum at quite a few levels, but it comes down, for aviation at least, to discussions that are being held in the ICAO FSMP, and those should continue, as well as the ITU, and in particular the World Radio Conference. But I think that we also need to foster more direct communications with other industries, broadcasting, mobile telephony, and state spectrum regulators. As an aviation regulator, I see that we left a gap there. We, EASA, should be having those discussions with the spectrum regulators in our member states. Again, going back to my good friend Gary Bird, he earlier stated that we should have government-industry partnership, but I do think that we also need industry-industry partnerships. I've had, over the past couple of months, I've had a few discussions with the representatives from the mobile telephony industry, and it's actually quite interesting. I learned a lot there, and I think that we should be, we have common interest there, and I think that we should be reaching out to them more often than we currently do. Finally, and this circles really back to our RTCA and EUROCAE, we need to build and maintain expertise. I'm really glad that we've been able to establish EUROCAE Working Group 124 or RTCA Special Committee 242 on exactly this topic of spectrum. I think it's a great initiative. I think it's important for this group to support the ICAO FSMP and their discussions with the ITU, to support us as aviation regulators, and I think I speak for both EASA and our colleagues at the FAA, and finally to support discussions with or within other organizations. For example, discussions that the FAA is having with FCC and NTIA, discussions that we're having in Europe with CEPT. So I think the key message that I'd like to convey here is working together implies that we have to become good neighbors. We have to reach out to other industries. We have to reach out to spectrum regulators, and we need, in that way, to have a more common discussion, more common platform. We should all be at the same level, and I hope that we'll be achieving this in the next couple of years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heta. So I think now I can hand over to Don from Honeywell.
Yes, thank you, Eric. I'd like to focus my presentation here on, reflecting back, especially on the painful experience we had with radar altimeters and the 5G issue, and just challenge the industry in saying, is this a one-time event, or is this going to happen over and over again as we go forward? And I think we've heard through these different sessions that spectrum is going to be a continuing challenge. So I believe it's Albert Einstein who said insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. So working together, what should we do different? How can we change our approach? So I broke this down into two aspects. One, how do we work with others outside of the aviation industry? And I think there's two important aspects to that. The first is getting earlier insight. Other panels have discussed getting earlier insights. I equate this to what the coal miners did when they would take canaries with them, to make sure they could, if the canary died, there was some bad air in the mine, and you better take some evasive action. So maybe we need aviation canaries to be sitting in some of the regional, national, state spectrum policymaker, regulator organizations, track what they're doing, and maybe in some cases really actively participate and provide real-time feedback. But who can do this? And maybe I would challenge that our international, regional, and national aviation associations and some of the regulatory authorities, maybe they could step up to do this. I don't think certainly the airlines or the OEMs or equipment manufacturers probably don't have the bandwidth to do this, but maybe that's an activity that our associations, could step up and perform for us. So it's a thought, who would be in a good position to do that. But once we get that early identification, then we as an industry need to be ready to better educate those outside of our industry about the impacts of the pending action on our industry. And I think so often, again, reflecting back on the 5G case, I think the engineers, the technologists, the scientists knew for several years in some of the standards developing organizations that the 5G issue was going to be a problem. But I would challenge us to think about how many times have we heard that industry executives were surprised. They didn't know about this, until it hit the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the mainstream media, and they were. I challenge all of us to think back. How many times did executives in our different organizations come back and say, well, why wasn't I aware of this? So I think we owe ourselves to have the engineers, pull themselves out of the decibels and the spectrum masks and all the other things that go into a 100, 200, 300 page standard, and we have to be able to abstract it up several layers until we get it simple, and as simple as perhaps having a one-page infographic that explains, what are the safety implications, what are the timeline implications, what are the costs involved, something that can be explained to executive level folks, our elected representatives in our various, legislatures around the world, the regulators in the spectrum, who aren't familiar with aviation specific spectrum issues. And of course, then, once you can get their attention with a one-page infographic, then you can go into, short white papers to help continue to educate them. And then finally, perhaps press releases in the in not only the industry media, but also the mainstream media. If something like RAD-ALT 5G probably warrants getting the court of public opinion to be thinking what we're doing. And I think we all know in the industry how long our aviation specific regulation timelines take to develop new standards, and then once you have a new standard, to develop new products, and then for the airspace users to actually buy, equip, and train to use those new products. So I think we need to explain that very clear, in very clear terms to others outside of our industry. Perhaps if we can educate them early, and before the spectrum regulators decide to auction or license some spectrum off, if we can make those costs to mitigate clearly understood, that perhaps as part of that license revenue, or there can be some discussion about how is our impacted industry, how are we going to be made whole, because we expect our products to be in use for decades, and no intent to replace a perfectly good working piece of avionics with something new or something to mitigate the new spectrum user coming on board. So I think having those kinds of information would be really important, and to get them out quickly. And I think we need to inform and lobby spectrum, spectrum policymakers, regulators, and non-aviation spectrum users. We need to educate them through multiple paths. When you have a complex topic to discuss, you shouldn't just say it once and hope they understand. Pick different ways, like the infographics or the white papers or media press releases. Find multiple vehicles to educate them, and educate them frequently and repeatedly, because it may take some of these audiences some time to understand, and hearing multiple ways and in multiple formats, the impacts to our aviation industry, they're not as steeped. Many of us have decades of experience and we understand this, but it's very new to some of these other folks. And then finally, we should educate until we know that they understand. So we should be looking for some acknowledgement that at least they understand our position. Whether or not they agree with it is a different topic, but we should continue to educate them until we're sure they understand all our points and all the impacts that we're addressing. So next slide, please. So then what do we need to do as different? What would we do differently working together within the aviation industry? I would propose, and leave it for thought for some of our associations, that we need a clearinghouse. We can't rely on our semi-annual, quarterly get-togethers in standards development organizations or policy meetings, things like that. We need to have a much faster approach to disseminate information, those aviation canaries in the mail, in the mine. Have those canaries, report out and alarm that there's something, and we need a clearinghouse for where that information can be presented to the aviation industry. And then we can, we should be developing, as we know those actions are coming, then we need to, develop aviation industry positions. And I think, again, reflecting back on the 5G situation with the RADALs, I think we would all agree that maybe the aviation regulators in the industry didn't come together as quickly as they could have. And so what do we need to do differently there? This is not only for our legacy systems that are out there and on our equipped aircraft out there, but think of all the new entrants. Think of UAS, UAM, RPAS, air taxis. Are they going to be having new spectrum requirements? And agreed, like I agree with others who have said, we need to use the spectrum more efficiently. Well, we could certainly start doing that with the new entrants if they're not going to be relying on some of the old spectrum and the old protocols and communications protocols and what have you. So, we can certainly look at those new entrants and within the industry, quickly, bubble up into a clearinghouse, what new spectrum requirements are coming out there from our own industry. And then we also need to look, I think others panels have said, about the impact on automation. So as we're moving to more and more automation and maybe less reliant on the human in the loop or on the loop, these spectrum issues are going to be really important. So maybe in their early days, maybe a radar altimeter just gave a height above terrain, to the pilot. But I think nowadays, we heard in previous panels, and we learned in the 5G radar case that radar altimeter is tied into many systems on the aircraft. So, do we truly understand that even amongst ourselves, how all these different spectrum using avionics, how that is integrated into all the automation that goes into these, and do we really know the impact on our industry's operations? So as I said on the previous slide, I think we as a group need to have a clearinghouse or a storehouse for infographics that, for instance, maybe on the 5G RADALT, we already developed, maybe some good talking points about our, what our regulations are like, what our product life cycle is like, what our costs are, what's the volume of avionics out there that make use of this spectrum or ground systems. And, we could probably bring those infographics and have them, refined and really get them honed down to where when a new issue comes up, we would have some ready-made infographics and white papers to initially start educating others outside of our industry on the impacts, and then develop the more pointed infographics, white papers for the particular issue that's coming up. But at least we can start to get that high level education out there to other industries. And then I think we collectively as an industry could probably do a better job of collecting best practices for engaging with spectrum policymakers, regulators, and non-aviation spectrum users. So, what went well, in the 5G, case, what didn't go so well? and let's keep a repository or a collaboration site someplace, some aviation industry association, set up a clearinghouse where we can keep all those best practices. And then finally, I think that can be across a couple dimensions. That can be across policy, that can be across regulation, and that can be across standards development. So we need to think of not only as as we often do, the technical issues at like a standards developing organization level, but we very quickly need to get it out of that realm and get it into the realm of influencing other spectrum regulators and policymakers and the court of public opinion. So, to summarize here, I think we need to identify early. As an industry, we need to coalesce quickly around a common position, and then we need to defend mightily with other stakeholders outside of our industry. We need to defend our position mightily and make sure we're heard and understood. With that, thank you, and back to Eric.
Okay, thank you, Don. So in order to have a bit of time left for the question in the end, I'll hand over to Pascal. Pascal, are you with us?
Sorry, my sound was off. Hello to everyone. My name is Pascal Luciani. I'm the Deputy Director for Air Navigation and Aviation Safety at the Air Navigation Bureau of ICAO. And as such, we are very much concerned with this issue. And it's one of the major risks that we identify for the future of aviation, and a question that needs to be addressed. So if we can go to the next slide. I was very much awed by the debates that we had during the RTCA EUROCAE sessions, and the fact that there is a common vision that is emerging. We all are coming here with different perspectives, but we are sharing a common vision. And I will have a spoiler alert on my presentation. It will be very much in line with all the other presentations. And I think that a new vision is emerging. Probably in a way, the 5G controversy, as nerve-wracking as it was, as worrying as it was the catalyst for a change and for finally going forward. And I would say that from ICAO's perspective, from the point of view of an international organization, the two main messages that we have now is the two key concepts of an argument-based defense of the spectrum and efficiency improvement, which is very much in line with what I have heard before. And I believe, to answer Don's question, no one wants to live the 5G crisis again. So next slide, please. The defense of the spectrum. Yes, it must be based on explanation and further explanation and anticipation. The basic assumption we must have is that there is no member state that is going to willingly endanger aviation safety, even to make a couple of billion of dollars in fees. So it's not the will that we're up against. This is not a fight of wills. This is a fight of information. What we must do is provide timely information, clear information, structured information, and anticipate as we go. Because just as I know member states none of them are willing to endanger aviation safety, no private operator is somewhere planning to say, oh, we'll build a great concept, make a lot of money based on endangering aviation safety. If they know it's not safe, they'll try to find ways around. So how do we work on that goodwill basic assumption? ICAO, as ICAO, we can provide a platform for a common message for a harmonized usage of frequency. Frequency spectrum is harmonized worldwide, and the solution will be worldwide. However, the work does not stop at ICAO, and each and every single member state will need to be vocal about the common message we have, will have to word it out, in the various forum when they're interacting, will have to interact with other actors in the country, in their country and international forums, and will have to work with ITU to move forward. We received at the assembly, the 41st assembly in September and October, a very strong mandate. And this mandate in resolution 41.7 urges member states to consider as a priority public and aviation safety on spectrum matters. This is something that for which I'm turning back to the member states. Help us deliver this message. And finally, in this arguments-based explanation, we can do nothing without the collaboration of our partners of ITU. It will be instrumental. We know that they are partners. We know that they are very willing to listen to us, but we have to provide the information and give them the input they need to move forward. So this is how we defend the spectrum. Next slide, please. Now, if we are going to be successful, the right to have our spectrum protected implies a duty to resolutely implement efficiency. We are going to be credible, we are going to be followed if we're efficient. And this is a message I've heard throughout the interventions of the last 2 days, and I couldn't be happier for that. In fact, the Assembly resolution A41.7 doesn't start with let's defend the spectrum. It starts with a commitment to deliver spectrum efficient aeronautical frequency management that meet current best practices. This is something that we must work into. One of the projects that is being initiated in ICAO is the Integrated CNS Spectrum, ICNSS initiative, which is a way forward and which will capitalize on what was mentioned before, especially working on redundancies, working on overlaps, and making sure that the system as a whole is made safer. We need to have a better understanding of the interactions at the border of frequencies. Never before were we so much challenged at the border of the frequencies, and this probably means that our knowledge, our realm of knowledge has to increase, and we have to work on this proactively. And finally, what we must work on is better resilience as a result of innovation. We cannot simply rely on saying we need a completely blank frequencies on either side of our frequencies to be safe. We need to work so that we attain resilience and that we are better able to cope with the incidents that will happen, and that we're better able to shift to other ways to achieve the same results. This innovation will, of course, not be brought up by ICAO itself, but through the collaboration of everyone. So this is, in a sense, the two messages I wanted to give. We have to defend ourselves, but we're not up against enemies. We're up with people who need our explanations to move forward. And if we want to get results, we have to show. We should not paint a target on our backs by not having improved. We must, on the contrary, show that we're leading the way, and that will get us to be followed by the rest of the member states and the aeronautical sector, because we share the common interests. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Pascal. So now hand over to Olivier from Airbus.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, first I would like to thank RTC and Roquet for the invitation to participate to this panel, which is a very good opportunity to share views and feelings about the spectrum. Unfortunately, it's the last panel. I will not be very innovative, in fact, because everything has already been said, and I will reiterate the same purpose. What is good in this situation is that we are almost all the same view, and in the future we can expect a very beneficial cooperation and coordination between us just to defend our spectrum. So, of course, spectrum is key for aviation. I think it is quite obvious, but as well as for other communities. We can just say, yes, the aviation needs a spectrum if there's no spectrum, there is no CNS, no interoperability, no aircraft, no business. But I would say that this is almost the same for the mobile community, because we talked a lot about the mobile community, but also for other radio community. So in the course of the different interventions, I noted that during this summit, that I heard several times that aviation is not so much involved and or present in a spectrum regulation forum, and also during the debates. Unfortunately, I have to admit this. I tend to agree on that situation. We can only observe that when we are looking at a dedicated forum or organization for in terms of a spectrum regulation, so international level in ITU or regional level in CPT, for example. There is other, of course, regional organization, but at least even if we are looking at ITU and CPT, where spectrum regulation is discussed, we can just observe that the aviation community is not well represented. And even if spectrum is key in different respects, and even if we have many stakeholders, because dedicated to aviation, there is authorities, there is industry, there are also airlines, and many other actors and stakeholders. So we have a high number with a lot of benefit, a lot of interest for spectrum. But at the end, what we can see is that in ITU, CPT, and other forum, there's not a lot of participation. So of course, there is a fact, and this fact is the aviation's benefits from a non-comparable advantage, which is a dedicated and protected spectrum. Yes, of course, there is some requirements. There is safety requirements, of course. And we could say that such considerations in terms of spectrum, dedicated and protected, is a must in terms of spectrum planning, spectrum coordination, and spectrum management. Is a must, but it is also a great advantage, because we need to deal with our own application, our own spectrum, and so on. So I will not say that this is an easy approach, but at least this facilitates our work in terms of spectrum. There is also one thing which has been pointed out in different intervention, and I heard that we are speaking with our own language. We have our own constraints and own requirements, of course, which are from aviation regulation, for example. But we have also common objectives and, in fact, at the end, limited external challenges, except in the case where we have to deal with a different neighbor. But at least in the band itself, we are within one community, which is the aviation community. So this is a constant, and this is the reason why there is this point is pointed out that the aviation community is quite isolated and focus on the aviation purpose. Today, there is one observation we could be made, is that almost all the aviation spectrum, the dedicated spectrum, is below 6 gigahertz. So 20 years ago, the golden band was below 1 gigahertz. But today, in front of the technology improvements and the different radio systems and new technology and new innovations, we can say today that the 6 gigahertz, below 6 gigahertz, we can talk about golden bands. So which means that there is a very high pressure on the usage of this band. And if we make the parallel, for example, with 5G and the different part of the spectrum, this spectrum, which is below 6 gigahertz, encompasses two needs for 5G, which is the coverage below 6 gigahertz, and also a mid spectrum, which is able to offer high data rate and also some capacity. So just to say that with regard to this spectrum, which is quite, I will not say congested, but very occupied, I would say. But the demand is very high, because it can cope with different needs for different proponents and different industries. Therefore, the least spectrum gap is a waste of spectrum that everybody could see as a usable resource, which means that we can be challenged every time if our own only protection is a spectrum gap, for example. So this is, I would say, quite provocative, and in red, it's more provocative yet. But today, there is a need just to defend our spectrum. And for that, I think that there is a need also to look at and to communicate and to exchange information with other spectrum users. Because of course, we have a main focus on the aviation domain. There is some authority, there are some regulation, but we are also depending on the spectrum regulation. And therefore, in that context, there is a need to be more involved in this debate and to take part on the discussions, and especially when our spectrum is challenged. In fact, the spectrum is a natural resource, which is managed by spectrum regulators for the benefits of everyone. So there is a need to accommodate all the need. So of course, when we look at ITU, for example, I would say that the basic rules is a compromise, but as already said, of course, safety cannot be subject to compromise. So we need to manage this dilemma, and we need also to ensure the correct protection for our safety applications. For that, we need to anticipate, to share information, and also to show some transparencies about our systems, how it works, how these systems could be protected in terms of interference criteria, and so on. So there is a strong need for more engagement in spectrum regulation, and also to participate to the debate, to share, to educate ourselves on spectrum, because there is a need, as mentioned previously. The radio altimeters discussion started with some misunderstanding about the wording which is used by both parties, but also there is a need to explain a little bit and to discuss about aviation needs, what are our requirements also, and our constraints to operate quite safely.
Okay.
So there is this. Next slide, please. So of course, the race is quite different, because on one side,
Olivier, can you please wrap up quickly now so that Nicolas has the time to talk?
Yes, this is a conclusion. So there is a strong a race which is quite different. On one side, we have the mobile, for example, but it's not the only community, but they can spend billions to gain access to spectrum. And there is also, I would say, applications which could answer to many domains. So it's quite attractive. And other needs on our side, we need to be to cope with our own need, and then we need to be committed and unified. I would say that the working together is quite obvious. So with all authorities, we used to discuss with aviation authorities, but there is also a need to extend this discussion with other authorities, and spectrum authorities is already key for the spectrum, of course. And one point, which is related to the industry, there is also a need to discuss and to coordinate ourselves in terms of industry, who represent aviation interests today. Today, there are, for other committee, we have the GSOA, we have the EASA, GSMA, GSA, SEA for satellite, mobile, car industry, okay. But for aviation, who is the association who defend and represent the aviation industry? So this is an open question, and I think this could be, this could help us at least to be unified, to talk with one voice, and to defend our interest in the spectrum regulation and spectrum 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. Nicolas, I leave the floor from ITU. I leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Next slide, please. Just before going to any advice, maybe it's useful to identify who are the main spectrum players. And from this point of view, you know that spectrum allocations and regulations, how to use this spectrum, are established in the ITU. These allocations and the international rules are decided at World Radio Communication conferences. They take place every 4 years, and the results reflected in the ITU radio regulations. Very important document because it has the status of international treaty ratified by the governments and mandatory for application in the countries. Then these ITU rules, international rules, are translated into national regulations, and here the responsibility goes to national telecom regulator. They have quite a significant degree of freedom in regulation on the condition that they don't cause interference to neighboring countries. Then we have also heavy weight player in spectrum, which is ICAO with all its functions and civil aviation authorities. And this gives us the list of spectrum players with regulatory functions. I would like also to mention that currently aviation has very good spectrum. In many cases, your allocations are exclusive. They're global, and this allows to provide interoperability in the global scale. They're large and valuable bands, and this explains why they're so attractive for other users. And aviation spectrum is very well protected in the ITU radio regulations. So you're very important, you're a privileged user, but you're not alone. There are 42 radio communication services in the ITU radio regulations. All require spectrum, science, governmental, mobile, broadcasting, and there are industries behind these communities. So I put these stakeholders on the right side of the screen. So you may need to talk to everybody. Spectrum regulators and spectrum users. Next slide, please. And then how to improve the situation. From my point of view, there are two main directions. First is good planning for future, and the second is more collaboration. Good planning for future implies that aviation protect well its current spectrum. And practical advice here, please just check frequency requirements for newcomers, especially from mobile community, and everything available in the agendas of World Radio Communication Conference, sometimes even 8 years in advance. And then when you identify the requirements, please assess impact on aviation with special attention to adjacent band, and radio altimeter situation proves that this is very important. Adjacent band compatibility. And the second direction is, or element, it's advanced planning for future aviation requirements. Your technologies are evolving, so you will need certainly new frequencies. It's good to identify them earlier. Practice shows that 8 or 10 years in advance before the conference, it's good time slot, and then start to explain your needs to other stakeholders, especially who are affected. Persuade, convince, charm these communities. And finally, just to repeat what other panelists said, that you may need more collaboration. Make friends with telecom regulator. They're very powerful players. Participate in ITU studies at all 3 levels. National level, speak to your national regulator, telecom, and your other spectrum users. Regional organization, there are 6 of them for different regions of the world, and the importance weight is growing. At the conference, they're making decisions there. And internationally, please come to ITU, participate in ITU studies, to put in recommendations your parameters, your protection needs, the ways how to share spectrum with others. Raise awareness, it means you explain the importance of your bands and your requirements to all other spectrum players, and disseminate, of course, best practices among your community. Here, I would just to recognize the very important and always increasing role of ICAO, its regional offices, and frequency spectrum management panel, doing great job. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. So we reach the end of the slot. I'm afraid we don't have very much time for questions, do we? Okay, thank you, Anna. So maybe I would like to ask one question to you, which is, Heather mentioned the initiative of RTCA Special Committee and the EUROCAE Working Group. What would be your views about the role that EUROCAE and RTCA can play in framing this way forward? So maybe Nikolai, as you have the floor, first, if you have some thoughts about that.
I would give the floor to other colleagues. We are quite away from from these two. Sorry about it.
No, no problem, no problem. Heta, maybe your views about that?
Yeah, I would think, first of all, a center of excellence. I think it's a good opportunity to bring the experts on spectrum that we have in the industry and with regulators together. And the second role that I think this community could play is perhaps, and I refer to what Don said, being that canary in the spectrum mine. And alert the community as early as they understand that there may be an issue.
Okay, thank you, Heta. Maybe Pascal from ICAO, an idea about that?
Well, from the point of view of ICAO, this is something we cannot do alone. And we have very, very strong partners with RTCA and EUROCAE. They have the ability to mobilize resources. They're credited. They have big credit, and I believe that they can be the bulk for a creation of the expertise we were calling for. Once again, the knowledge is going to be the key. This is something I really believe in. And if we can build this knowledge, things will be much easier than we anticipate, and we will probably not need to be fighting as much. So we would really like to turn to you to develop this in collaboration with your partners. So I can only be in favor of this.
Okay, thank you, Pascal. Interesting. So maybe it's time that we stop. I have plenty of questions I could ask, but I'm afraid that we must stop here. Thank you very much to all of you. And Anna, I hand over to you now.